You think you're brave enough to hear our terrifying stories? Before the darkness consumes you and the story begins, subscribe, if you dare. The Last Trick. Every year I've enjoyed driving around town on Halloween, admiring the creative decorations and festive vibe. But this particular Halloween was different. I started my drive as the sun sank below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows that merged with the approaching night. The children were already out, their costumes a blur of color and energy. Witches, superheroes, and ghouls ran from house to house, laughter filling the air. As I drove further from the town center, the houses became more sparsy and the decorations more unique. I found myself on a road I didn't recognize, surrounded by thick woods. It was puzzling. I'd lived in the town for years and thought I knew every street. Then I saw her. A little girl stood at the side of the road, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, drenched from head to toe, her black shoes muddied. She held a jack-o'-lantern in her hand, its flickering light giving her face an eerie glow. I slowed down, rolling down the window. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. She didn't answer, but extended her arm, thumb outstretched. A hitchhiker? On Halloween? The very thought sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't leave a child alone in such a desolate place. I unlocked the passenger door. "Come on in," I said hesitantly. The girl climbed in, her gaze fixed ahead, not uttering a word. I noticed her jack-o'-lantern was exceptionally detailed, with intricate carvings and a terrifyingly sinister smile. It didn't have a candle, but instead seemed to be illuminated from within. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She pointed forward, her wet hair dripping onto the car seat. I turned up the heater, hoping to offer some warmth, but the car grew colder. "Are you out here trick-or-treating?" I tried again, attempting to pierce the silence. The girl turned to face me. Her eyes were pale, almost translucent, and they held centuries of sadness. "I'm looking for my house," she whispered. As we drove, the fog became denser. Shapes moved just beyond my field of vision, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly. Every now and then the girl would murmur, "Not here. Keep going." The radio, which had been playing Halloween classics, began to distort, replaced by static and a faint voice singing a melancholy lullaby. I tried changing the station, but every channel was the same haunting tune. The jack-o'-lantern's glow intensified, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach out towards me. Finally, the girl motioned for me to stop. We were in front of an old dilapidated mansion, its windows shattered and ivy consuming its walls. The once grand entrance was now a gaping mouth leading into darkness. "This is my home," she said, her voice shaking. Before I could respond, the car lights illuminated a group of figures standing in the driveway. Children, in outdated clothing, their faces pale and eyes hollow, stared back at me. Each held a uniquely carved jack-o'-lantern, their eerie glows syncing in a rhythm as if they were breathing. The girl opened the door and stepped out, joining the group. They formed a circle, their jack-o'-lanterns in the center, creating a beacon of terrifying light. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as they began to chant in an ancient tongue. The ground rumbled, and from the house's entrance, shadowy figures emerged. Adults dressed in ceremonial robes, faces hidden under hooded cloaks. They moved towards the children, each one stopping behind a child, placing their hands on their shoulders. Suddenly, the little girl pointed at me, her face contorted in a scream. The cloaked figures turned their attention to my car, their pace quickening. In sheer terror, I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching against the gravel. The chanting grew louder, echoing in the depths of my mind. I swerved onto the main road, glancing back to see the group had stopped at the mansion's boundary, their glowing jack-o'-lanterns painting the night with horror. When I finally reached the safety of my home, I bolted inside, my heart racing. I peered out the window, half expecting to see those haunting figures, but there was nothing. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back to the place, only to find an empty lot. The mansion, the figures, the little girl, all gone. At the town library, I discovered an old article about a mansion that had once stood there. It spoke of a dark Halloween ritual where the town's children were sacrificed to ensure prosperity. That night, as I locked every door and window, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. And on my doorstep, a single, intricately carved jack-o'-lantern. Its glow not of this world, forever reminding me of the last trick I'd encountered on a Halloween night. When the masks won't come off. Every Halloween, my small town threw a large masquerade ball in the old Whitman mansion, a house that, legend said, was cursed. I never believed in those legends. That is until this particular Halloween. Having always been the skeptic, I decided to attend the masquerade for the first time. An old friend, Jenna, was organizing the event and promised it would be an unforgettable night. She wasn't wrong. Upon arrival, the mansion was bathed in a haunting blue glow. Silhouettes danced behind draped windows and eerie music beckoned guests inside. I wore a simple dark cloak and a plain white mask I found at a vintage store. Its eerily realistic features were oddly captivating, despite its simplicity. The ballroom was spectacular. Candles floated mid-air, casting flickering lights on masked guests. The atmosphere was intoxicating, with whispers of admiration for each other's costumes and guesses at who might be behind the masks. As the night deepened, I noticed a woman in a shimmering silver dress, her mask similar to mine but with delicate painted tears. We danced without speaking, lost in the music and each other. The world blurred until it was just us. The clock struck midnight and a cold wind blew open the main doors. A hush fell. Jenna stood atop the grand staircase, clapping slowly. "I hope you've chosen your masks wisely," she sang out. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. I reached up to remove my mask to show I wasn't afraid of Jenna's theatrics, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged as I realized it wasn't just sticking. It felt as though it had fused with my skin. Screams echoed as others made the same horrifying discovery. The woman in silver clutched at her mask, her real tears now blending with the painted ones. We were trapped in our disguises. Jenna descended the staircase, her red gown flowing like spilled wine. "The legend is true," she cackled. "The Whitman curse is real. On All Hallows' Eve at the stroke of midnight, masks worn in this house become the face of the wearer." People rushed to the doors and windows, but they were sealed shut. The candles extinguished, plunging the room into darkness, the only light emanating from Jenna's glowing eyes. In the pitch black, chaos erupted. People clawed at their faces, their masks merging with flesh and bone, transforming their bodies. The sounds of agony were maddening. In the midst of the turmoil, I felt a hand grasp mine. It was the woman in silver. We clung to each other, her tears wet on my shoulder. The pain was excruciating as the mask molded into my very being. I could feel my features shifting, my identity slipping away. When dawn broke, the doors unsealed themselves. The first rays of sunlight revealed a ballroom of horrors. Guests lay sprawled in grotesque forms, their costumes and masks having reshaped them. Some were unrecognizable, while others were trapped in perpetual screams. Jenna's laughter was the last thing I heard before everything faded. I awoke to blinding light and the sound of sirens. First responders combed through the room, checking pulses and looking for survivors. Near the grand staircase, Jenna's lifeless body lay draped in her crimson gown, her eyes still glowing faintly. Weeks turned into months, yet the masks remained. Doctors were baffled. They couldn't separate the masks from our faces without risking significant harm. The woman in silver and I, having formed a bond that night, sought solace in each other. Our true faces lost, we became known by the town as the Tearful Twins. Every Halloween since, the town remains silent. The Whitman mansion stands as a forbidden place, its doors sealed, the horrors of that night locked within. Yet something calls me back each year. As All Hallows' Eve approaches, I find myself standing outside the mansion, the woman in silver beside me, gazing up at its looming facade. And every year, as midnight approaches, a faint sound drifts from the mansion, the echo of a familiar, haunting laughter, and a voice whispering, "Choose your mask wisely." The masks might have taken our faces, but they couldn't take our souls. We are forever bound by that night, a testament to a Halloween gone horrifyingly wrong. The Forever Pumpkin. Halloween was always my favorite time of the year. Growing up in the small town of Eldridge, Halloween was a big deal. Every house would be decorated, kids would be talking about their costumes weeks in advance, and the Eldridge annual pumpkin carving contest was the main event. This year, I was determined to win. I'd lost to Billy Thompson 3 years in a row, and I was ready to reclaim the title. My secret weapon was an ancient-looking pumpkin I'd found at a mysterious old vendor's stall at the edge of the town's market. He'd claimed it was a forever pumpkin, one that would never rot. Halloween night arrived, and my pumpkin, intricately carved, sat proudly outside my home. The deep cuts I'd made seemed to come alive, its eerie glow stronger than any candle could produce. As dusk fell, trick-or-treaters roamed the streets, their laughter and chatter filling the air. It was heartwarming until I noticed something strange. Children who approached my house to admire my pumpkin would become entranced by it, their eyes locked on its glow. They would stand there, motionless, for minutes before being pulled away by their parents. Feeling uneasy, I decided to stay by the door to keep an eye on things. As the evening wore on, I noticed more and more children gathered around the pumpkin, their faces pale, eyes wide. Whispers filled the air, but not of children's laughter. It was a monotone chant coming from them, in a language I'd never heard before. Panicking, I tried to approach the pumpkin to remove it, but an invisible force pushed me back. The children's chant grew louder and more urgent. From the midst of the crowd, Billy Thompson emerged, his face contorted in fear and anger. "This is your doing," he screamed at me. "You have to fix this." I racked my brain, trying to remember the old vendor's words when I bought the pumpkin. A faint memory surfaced, his raspy voice saying, "To quell its thirst, it demands a tribute." Without a second thought, I dashed inside my house, searching for something, anything to serve as a tribute. In my attic, I found an old family heirloom, a silver amulet that had been passed down for generations. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. Rushing outside, I approached the pumpkin, the force from earlier now gone. I placed the amulet next to it and closed my eyes, whispering, "I offer this tribute to quell your thirst." For a moment, there was silence. Then, an ear-piercing shriek filled the air. The pumpkin's glow became blindingly bright, then dimmed until it was nothing more than a lifeless gourd. I looked around. The children were free, their faces filled with confusion and fear. Billy approached me, his earlier anger replaced by gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Halloween night continued, the traumatic event quickly becoming a ghost story told in hushed tones. However, the story doesn't end there. A year passed, and Halloween came around once again. I'd sworn off the pumpkin contest, the events from the previous year still fresh in my mind. But as I walked through the town's market, I spotted a familiar sight: the mysterious old vendor and his forever pumpkins. Curiosity getting the better of me, I approached him. "Why did you sell me that pumpkin last year? Do you know what happened?" He simply smiled, his eyes filled with mischief. "Ah, the tribute you offered was adequate. But remember, every year the forever pumpkin's thirst grows. You might have satisfied it last year, but who knows about this year?" And with that, he disappeared, leaving behind a stall full of forever pumpkins, their glow beckoning the townsfolk. That night, as children took to the streets, I stayed indoors, the lights off. But I couldn't escape the haunting glow of forever pumpkins that now sat outside every house in Eldridge, their thirst waiting to be quenched. The haunting of Hollow Street. Hollow Street, despite its ominous name, was a beacon of festivity every Halloween. As a child, I would scamper from door to door, my candy bag swelling with each stop. But growing older meant observing traditions rather than participating in them. This year, at 27, I decided to throw a Halloween party at my ancestral home, the oldest on Hollow Street. Excitement bubbled as I draped cobwebs across the staircase and set out ancient family portraits, their eyes seeming to follow you. I transformed the basement into a haunted maze using old dolls and mannequins dressed in period clothing. They were unsettling with their lifelike eyes and cracked faces, perfect for a scare. Guests began to trickle in as darkness blanketed Hollow Street. Laughter, chatter, and eerie background music filled the house. Friends marveled at the authenticity of the haunted maze, some too scared to enter alone. As the night thickened, I decided to lead a group through the maze, eager to witness their reactions. We descended, the stairs creaking under our weight. The only light came from dim lanterns, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The group's nervous gigglies echoed as we ventured deeper. Every so often, someone would scream as they brushed against a cold mannequin hand or felt the unblinking gaze of a doll. It was all in good fun until we reached the heart of the maze. There, in the center, stood a mannequin I didn't recognize. It was dressed in a tattered white gown, stained with age. Its hair was long and wild, cascading over its face, hiding its features. I chalked it up to a prank by one of my friends, trying to up the scare factor. However, as we circled the figure, I felt a cold draft. The temperature plummeted. The lanterns flickered as an unseen force blew through the basement. The group's unease was palpable. Suddenly, the mannequin's head snapped up, revealing its face, or lack thereof. It was smooth, featureless, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth. Yet, an intense feeling of being watched washed over me. A guttural whisper like wind through a hollow tunnel echoed, "Leave." Panic ensued. Guests pushed and shoved, scrambling for the stairs. In the chaos, the lanterns went out, plunging us into darkness. The only sound was our desperate breaths and the slow, deliberate footsteps of the mannequin. I reached out, feeling the cold wall, guiding a few others with me. We moved as quickly and silently as possible, praying we wouldn't encounter the entity. Emerging into the dim light of the main floor felt like a rebirth. We bolted out, warning the remaining guests. The party spilled onto Hollow Street, whispers of the haunted maze fueling the town's legends. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know the origins of the mannequin. Armed with a flashlight, I headed to the attic, where the old family records were kept. Dust motes floated lazily as I rifled through old journals, looking for any clue. I stumbled upon a diary from the 1800s belonging to a distant relative, Eleanor. The diary spoke of her deep loneliness, of being trapped in a loveless marriage. One entry caught my eye. "Tonight, under the cloak of All Hallows' Eve, I shall take my fate into my own hands. If I cannot escape in life, then I shall in death. The empty form shall be my vessel." Piecing it together, I realized Eleanor had transferred her spirit into the mannequin, a cursed existence, forever trapped. Determined, I returned to the basement. The mannequin stood at the foot of the stairs, its head turning slowly towards me. "Eleanor," I whispered, "I know your pain, but this isn't the way. You need to find peace." For what felt like hours, we stood in silence. Then, a soft sob echoed through the darkness. The mannequin collapsed, turning to dust, leaving behind an old, tattered white gown. The next day, I held a small ceremony, burying the gown under the old oak tree in the backyard, a symbol of Eleanor finally finding her peace. Hollow Street, as lively as ever, continued its Halloween traditions. But the tale of my haunted maze became legendary, whispered from generation to generation. Every year at the stroke of midnight on Halloween, if you listen closely, you can hear Eleanor's soft lullaby, a testament to a Halloween night gone terrifyingly wrong.